So you can build Angular applications as single-page applications. This has some potential disadvantages, though, which might not matter to you on the other hand. But you also have another option when it comes to building Angular applications. You can build a server-side rendered app. You can use server-side rendering, and that's what SSR stands for. Now that's an Angular app where its routes are actually rendered on demand on a dynamic web server. So instead of just having a single HTML file and letting client-side Angular do everything, with a server-side rendered app, when a user wants to visit a certain page, the request is handled on the server first, and the page that was requested is pre-rendered on demand on the server so that the finished page is sent back to the user. And that's an important difference. Instead of getting that essentially empty single HTML file and having client-side JavaScript do everything, the user receives the finished page with all its content. That being said, that page still includes lots of Angular JavaScript code, which then takes over and hydrates the page once it has been received by the browser. So then it will actually become a single page application, and subsequent actions will be handled by client-side JavaScript. So that you get the best of both worlds. Instant responses due to client-side JavaScript doing the heavy work, but at the same time, finished pages without missing content for the initial request. Now, when going for a server-side rendered app, you therefore need a dynamic web server which is able to run code on it as it receives those incoming requests. A server that's just able to return HTML and JavaScript files is no longer enough then. Instead, it must be a server that's able to execute Node.js code specifically because it's that compiled JavaScript code, your Angular code compiled to JavaScript, that must be executed on demand on this server now. Now, the advantage of building such a server-side rendered app is therefore that users no longer receive an empty HTML file or an almost empty HTML file, but instead a file that contains all the content. And that's also great for search engine crawlers. But this approach also has some potential disadvantages. For example, if rendering a component takes a bit longer, due to some data fetching, for example, then it takes a bit longer until the user gets back a response to their request. So they might be seeing a blank page for a couple of milliseconds or seconds. In addition, we have increased complexity because we now do need such a dynamic web server, and we must set up this application to support server-side rendering. But that's exactly what we'll take a look at in the next lectures. So how can we build our Angular application as a server-side rendered app? Well, thankfully, Angular helps us here. Turning an Angular application into a server-side rendered Angular application, or an Angular application that's ready for server-side rendering, is as simple as running ng-add @angular/ssr. Now, I did already mention this ng-add command before in this section, and as mentioned there, you can use this command to add libraries to your project and to also configure your project for these libraries. So only libraries, only collections that support this command can be added with it in the end. And server-side rendering is a feature that's provided by Angular itself, and it is a feature that can in the end be added by adding this special Angular SSR library with that ng-add command. Alternatively, when creating a new Angular project with ng-new, you could also add this --SSR flag to the command to create an Angular project that comes with server-side rendering enabled right from the start. With that, if you hit enter, Angular will go ahead and then possibly ask you a couple of questions and then go through a couple of steps to prepare this project for server-side rendering. And the Angular CLI will actually also give you an overview of the core steps it took to prepare this project for server-side rendering. For example, it updated the TypeScript and the Angular configuration files. And the Angular configuration file is the more interesting one. In there, it added various settings to support server-side rendering. You could have done that manually, but that would have been more work, so that's a pretty useful command to run. It, for example, also added this server.ts file, which in the end contains the code of this Node.js server that will in the end be used to serve your application. So it's this compiled file combined with some other code that must be deployed to that dynamic web hosting provider. Now you could tweak the code in this file if you needed to support other routes or other settings, but by default this server is set up such that it's ready to dynamically run your Angular code on the server and that it's then also able to return the result of running your Angular code as a page to the website visitor. So this server code here takes care of preparing your Angular-driven pages on the server and of serving them back to the website users. Now, in addition, there also have been some adjustments to the source folder. For example, a main.server.ts file was added. This is needed to do the application initialization on the server if the Angular code executes there. And an app.config.server.ts file was added as well, and that simply configures the application for server-side rendering. Now, none of your code was deleted. Instead, it was just adjusted to now also support server-side rendering. But you could now still work on that project as you did before and add components and use all these Angular features as you did it before. But with that, the app is now prepared for server-side rendering, and therefore we can now try building it as a server-side rendered app. So how do we now build this application as a server-side rendered app? Well, the first step is to enable server-side rendering by running this command if it wasn't enabled already. And then the second step is to again run npm run build. And due to that changed Angular configuration, Angular will automatically understand that it should now build this project for server-side rendering. Now, as a result, you'll still get that dist folder, but in there, you now don't just find a browser folder in that routing folder, but also a server folder. And that server folder now contains the code that, well, would be put on the server that serves your application. But before we take a look at deployment, let's actually try running this server-side application locally. Because this command here did actually not just add all those settings and changes that are needed to build this application for server-side rendering, but it also added a new script to the package.json file, which you can run to preview this server-side rendered application on your system. So almost like the development server, but now the production-ready application. And therefore here, if you run npm run serve:/ssr:/routing in my case, so this command here, you'll get a new address which you can visit on your local machine to preview this server-side rendered Angular application. So if you enter this URL and you hit enter, you should see your application. But there you'll also notice a problem if you try loading the tasks for a user. Or to be precise, if you're trying to do that and you then reload the page. If you do that, nothing changes on this page, but if you go back to your project, you'll encounter an error in your terminal there, where you started that server. You'll see an error that local storage is not defined. And where's this error coming from?